In this video I talk about not a game like I so often do, but a book about games. So the book is Zones of Control, published by MIT Press, edited by Harrigan and Kirschenbaum, and it is a big book. Nice hardcover, over 700 pages. Also in each page the text is in 2 columns, so that packs a lot more text than otherwise. You have a lot of illustrations, black and white illustrations, but very pleasant still and very useful when it is about exemplifying elements of the discourse, things that need to be said or that are better explained when visualized. A book to which a lot of different authors contributed. It's a book with 59 essays and a lengthy introduction about wargaming. And with so many authors that do come from all paths of life, then you do have an incredible an incredible richness of perspectives on wargaming. From digital wargaming, analog wargaming, combat systems in role-playing games, pedagogical approaches to wargaming used in all sorts of contexts by the military for training purposes, as predictive models, wargames applied to social issues, wargames for the classroom, anything and everything that you can think could be related to wargaming was discussed in here. Well, pretty much. And what I really like is precisely this holistic approach here to wargaming as an incarnation, as embodiment of gaming. These days when you pick up a book that is labeled as about game studies, and you think, oh great, I'm going to read me an article about Thailand struggle, I'm going to learn more about Puerto Rico, how pandemic was designed, most likely it will turn out that the book is entirely or almost entirely about digital games, which is fine because video games are so important these days. So it is okay. There's nothing strange about the fact that the lion's share in academic studies when it comes to games is about video games. But the problem that I have is when you have studies labeled as game studies in general that only talk about those. If they were labeled as video game studies, then we would know what we're talking about. I think that the label of game studies should really be reserved to an holistic approach to those studies that talk about the various embodiments, digital, analog, role-playing games, etc., etc., etc. So, I have something against, as you can see, the identification that is so common these days in video games, in game studies with video games. This book here reversed the trend because it gives a stronger emphasis to manual, to analog wargaming, while also giving you a lot about digital games and a lot about social interactions that get they're analog, but still is very different when you have a game that has a strong role-playing element as opposed to a game where everything is defined by rigid interactions on a board using maths, using tables, etc., etc. I would see I see these as the three main embodiments of gaming these days: the digital, the analog, and the role-playing oriented. And this book does them all. It has all three elements with a stronger emphasis on analog, then digital, then role-playing game. But still, there is enough variety that I think this is not just analog game studies. It is game studies they should be done taking all aspects into account. And given that the analog aspect is the one that has been neglected so far, I don't mind that for a while we give emphasis to that one until we finally get to a point where we're all well conversant with all aspects of gaming, and then we can talk about game studies more in general. So this is a game that has a lot of variety, a book that has a lot of variety in it. So many different authors and very reputable authors. If you're interested in gaming, wargaming, game studies, going through the index is almost like going to a party where you know you're going to meet a lot of people that you like, a lot of people that you respect, that you want to hear what they have to say, and maybe some people that are not your favorite ones, but that's perfectly fine. With big numbers, there's going to be a little bit of everything. But definitely a lot of authors that You have read some of their books in the past if you're interested in game studies, or you're playing some of their games if you're interested in gaming. I mean, a little bit of both. You play the games and then you read their scholarship. From John Peterson, an historian of role-playing games and games in general, game designers such as Lee Brimcombe Woods, Mark Herman, Ted Racer, John Prados. You have then experts of military wargaming such as Peter Perla. You have scholars that have discussed games in a cultural perspective such as Miguel Sicart or Mary Flanagan. You have Philip Sabin that designed game, then wrote important essays about the theory of designing historical games that can be used as pedagogical tools. You just have a lot of different contributors and a lot of different perspectives. Now the game is organized in 9 sections, and that gives you a general good map, so that allows you to more likely find what you're looking for when you're going to a certain section. This being said, there's so much variety, approaches, content, topic, etc., that I think organizing the game, the book must have been a nightmare. Figuring out, does this go in this section or that other section, must have been terrible. And as you read, sometimes you will find an article that maybe you'll think, maybe that should have been a more representative part of that section, would be a better fit for that other section. And that's okay. It's pretty much impossible to organize such complex number of voices in a way that is absolutely rational and airtight. And there's no problem with that. Actually, I think there even is an advantage. Going through all of these essays is like walking by the shelves of a library and serendipitously finding books that you didn't think would be for you, but then all of a sudden you realize, you know what, that actually may interest me. And that is how you learn new things. That is how you branch out from the things that you already know, and you want to know to the things that you didn't know you wanted to know, you didn't think would be interesting to you, and they may actually bring you insights that you didn't expect. This is a great advantage that we have in open libraries, as opposed to libraries where you're just ordering a book from them through the catalog and it is delivered to you, and started to branch out and find new things. This is a book where you will find what you want, what you're looking for. From time to time you'll stumble upon an article that is not all that interesting to you, but you will also get to learn things that you didn't expect, approach, embrace, discover perspectives that you were not familiar with. And to me, this is the real value of a collection of this type. This is why large collection of this type, although some of the articles probably will not be of interest to you, the real value is in the fact that a large collection of this type is more than the sum of the parts, precisely because of the discoveries of new things that they will allow you to do. That is to say, when you pick up this book, and if you're interested in wargaming at all, most likely you will find a lot of things that you will enjoy. You will discover new things, and from time to time there will be an article that will not be in a perspective that interests you, and that's perfectly fine. Now, talking about the various sections, to give you a sense of the general architecture organization of the book, the first section is called Paper Wars, in honor of the foundational text by A.G. Wells, and this section talks about the basic history of wargaming. There are 7 essays here, and I wouldn't have minded if there were a couple more, but again, that may just be from me because I enjoy reading about history so much, and history of war games too. This being the foundational element where we create really the platform, what happened so far, upon which we build the rest of the discourse. I wouldn't mind if there were a couple of more articles, longer articles, but the ones that are in here are excellent. Again, probably are some of my favorite articles, but it may again just come from my personal predilection for this type of approach. Here's where we find an article by John Peterson about history of wargaming, where Brimcombe Wood talks about representing air warfare in games. We have a very excellent article, one that I enjoyed immensely, by A. Scott Glancy about war and combat in tabletop role-playing games. So there clearly is very porous, a very fluid interconnection between war games and role-playing games, given that tabletop role-playing games came out of a rib of war games in the 1970s, as more role-playing elements were added to well-known combat war game engines of the time. Then we have a section called War Engines, which is more about the design, the mechanics, what's behind the scenes of war games. And here we have articles by Racier, by Herman. Very good stuff. For example, Herman talks about Empire of the Sun, Racer talks about Paths of Glory. So games that are classics, and they're such for a reason, and it's nice to know more about the engines, about the recipe, about the moving parts that you do not always necessarily see when you're playing the game, but that are there, although you may not always see them. Then there's a section called Operations, which is more technical, and again, some people are like, yes, the technical stuff. For me, that's a little less interesting, or at least if nothing else, since I'm interested in the cultural aspect of games and the pragmatic aspect of games. I have a harder time really, well, I'll say clearly, figuring out what's going on when people talk about the technical stuff, but with some effort I can deal. And for some people, actually, that will be maybe the best part, the crowning element. So the part is called Operations, and it's all about the mathematical, the theoretical underpinning to war games, about the various models, the tables, the statistics that are employed so that war games work. Again, I really respect that, because without those, we wouldn't have war games that then are interesting from the point of view of gameplay, from the pragmatical point of view, that are relevant culturally, and so on and so forth. In the next section, The Bleeding Edge examines a game about contemporary conflict, and he starts also talking about future possible simulations, about simulating events that haven't happened yet, that are happening as we simulate them. So there is the extra element of incorporating data in a way that you do not necessarily have to worry about when you're working with conflicts from the past. And then we have another section called Systems and Simulations, which starts getting into gray areas of wargaming. And there are several sections in the book, and this is probably where you have some of those articles I said could fit in one or the other section equally. This first section about the gray areas is called Systems and Situations, which starts paying more attention to wargaming in countercultural context, non-standard critical games. And so just to give you some examples of the systems and situations, we have, for example, an article I enjoyed very much about the board, the filmmaker, the famous artist, one of the founders of situationism, one of the most prominent figures of situationism. I didn't know that he had also created a war game in particular, a war game that seems to be inspired by Napoleonic warfare, it's very peculiar. It has a very high level of abstraction, a game that I didn't know about. Now I want to read the rules, and apparently after some research it turns out that it's very hard to read in English, because it seems that the translations are serviceable, but also there are several mistakes. But then it turns out from reading this essay here that also the original rule book was problematic to start with. So one gets to wonder if the board really was just a sloppy editor and a sloppy teacher of rules, or there's something else going on. Maybe it is about questioning wars and questioning wargamings, undermining, deconstructing their simulation as you assume, pretend, you seem to be wanting to describe reality, but in truth maybe you're questioning the ways that we use to describe reality. I don't know. Read this, you can form your own ideas. It's nice to have a discussion with a mental discussion with the article that you have here, and if that also encourages you to look closer into the board's work, all the better. Definitely, I want to know more. I want to try the game for myself. And the game, I'm telling you, the game per se, from what I read here, doesn't seem all that interesting. It seems a game by someone who knows about classic games, mass market games, and knows about history, but may not have been familiar with classic game systems such as the ones created by SPI or by Avalon, which were dominant at the time in which the board's war game was made, which again, all the more mysterious as a way of breaking from the mold and looking at reality in a fresh way, or is it from somebody who is an artist, knows about war, and is pretty much trying to reinvent the wheel without knowing that the wheel had been invented already, without knowing the system that the people have done. Interesting element there. Then we have the Warroom section, which is about applications of wargaming to the classroom. Here, of course, Philip Sabin's essay is the first one, because he's definitely one of the authorities in this element. We have an article by Charles Vasey about the amateur designer for fun and profit. We have articles about model-driven military wargame design and evaluations. Then we have section 7, which is about the irregularities, and again, in a certain sense, it's about the gray areas, those that do not fit. So from Cohen, no surprise here that we have an essay by Brian Train and by Volker Runke writing together about how to model modern insurgency. I don't think there is any authority out there that is more respectable on the topic of insurgency in wargaming as than Runke, so always interesting to see what he has to say, together with Brian Train. Then we have other theaters, in which again we get to talk about wargaming and its application with fields outside of war and gaming. For example, we have an article by John Prados discussing Third Reich, his own design, and Third Reich, the novel by Robert Bolaño, inspired by that game, or in any case, that has a lot to do with that game. An article about Starfleet battles, so an interesting idea of a war game, one of the most respected and most challenging war games out there, that has to do with a franchise, with a narrative universe that was created fictionally outside of the world of wargaming. So it's a different set of problems that you may have from when you're picking up some books about Napoleonic warfare and trying to figure out how to create a game about battles in that period. The idea is like, what do we do when there isn't a solid, objectively existing set of facts that you can borrow from, and that you also have the challenge of mirroring. Then the final section, Fight for the Future, is about where wargaming may go. It is not so much about simulating future events, but precisely about finding new ways of simulating conflict, of simulating events. Here we talk about wargaming, the cyber frontier, how to sell war games to non-war gamers. To me, this is a very important topic because I love hobby games, war games, and I want the hobby to last forever. And there's no way of doing that unless we get war games visible somewhere else than in specialized websites and in specialized stores, somewhere outside of clubs and circles of people that already know war games. How do we expose people that do not know war games to this aspect of gaming, so that maybe one day they'll decide to pick it up and continue the tradition? So there's some interesting ideas in here. And the last essay of the book is by Mary Flanagan. If you know anything about the scholarship of Mary Flanagan, you probably can even already expect what to find here. In that sense, it wasn't very surprising, but it's still a very good essay in which Mary Flanagan applies her usual philosophy of gaming. Mary Flanagan has written a lot about critical play, about the idea of using gameplay elements, gameplay mechanics, traditions and conventions to say something different, to apply them artistically, to use them not simply to simulate things that happen, but to question reality, question assumptions, create an aesthetic experience, create a poetic experience, etc., etc. And here's Mary Flanagan is trying to figure out what could be ways of changing known wargaming conventions so that they can express something else, they can cover aspects of reality that they have been neglected before, and they can cover different approaches to war games, maybe different approaches to conflict resolution. As long as war games only simulate ballistic elements and movement and impact and charges and melee, etc., etc., then as we concentrate on those, so we're not focusing on other things, so we're not exploring other ways that that we could adopt to resolve conflict. And she is wondering if there are ways of encouraging a different type of thinking about war by creating different practices for wargaming. Can changing wargaming help us think of ways that may change how we think of war? So very thought-provoking. Again, I don't want to sound like when I said is typical linear production, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to reduce or undermine the originality of this essay. It's another excellent contribution to the world and the thinking about wargaming by Mary Flanagan, another one in the line with other contributions that she gave in the past. In conclusion, Zones of Control is an excellent book. As I said, some chapters you'll go through them because they won't be for you. This is unavoidable with a collection with so much variety and richness. Some other chapters you will spend hours and hours thinking about them, not because they're hard to read, but just because they give you so many insights, so many ideas. You interrupt reading because you want to go online and get extra information about this or that. You want to learn more about this or that. You want to order books and games that are ordered in there. That's another thing that will happen. If you like war games, most likely before you finish this book, you will have bought the books or checked out of the books of the library. You will have bought the games or borrowed the games. It is a book that encourages you to read more books and play more games, because it is a book that opens paths to knowledge, to investigation, to learning new things. And to me, this is precisely what books and games should do. It should get you more curious about different nets of ideas, should get you the motivation to go and look further into other things. Books teach us stuff, but we should never think of learning as just, as a box that I close and now I have it and I get it all and don't touch it, it's mine, and I'm going to put it on the shelf and I'm going to forget about it. I know that I have it and that's all that I do with it, basking in the joy and just enjoying the idea that I have it. Knowledge should be something, learning should be something fluid, mobile, open, should be a system of paths, a net of paths, rather than a collection of boxes on the shelf. Zones of Control is a good map in that sense. It is a map that is not so much about delimiting an area and drawing edges around it. It is much more about encouraging you to branch out and to walk onto those paths and see how they lead you and explore the new places that partially are described here, partially hinted at in this book, and then those new places are left for you to discover later in further readings, researches, investigations, inquiries. Zones of Control, it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it to anybody and everyone who has any interest in wargaming, because you will find something in here that you will like, and it's always great to learn new things about what you like. Zones of Control, MIT Press. Highly recommended.